Welcome everybody to my session on writing concisely. And we focus on the problems and the solutions. Now here is a quick overview of the presentation. I'll start with rationale and then explain the definition, defining conciseness, and explain the targeted students. And then I'll move to a summary of the problems and the solutions, followed by illustrations of sentences taken from students' essays to illustrate the problems and the solutions. And I will end the presentation with a guiding strategy and concluding remarks. Okay, here's a quick rationale for writing concisely. As ESL teachers, especially writing teachers, we know that wordiness is a very common problem. Wordiness simply means using more words than necessary. So to help students achieve conciseness and advance their language skills, advance, these are the buzzwords of this symposium, we needed to raise the awareness of conciseness. Okay? If they don't know what is conciseness, what it means, then it's hard for them to do it. And that's not enough. We need to show them as teachers how to identify wordy language and how to revise, how to correct wordiness. Okay, so why writing concisely is important? For academic writing style, we know that academic writing style requires a number of features. Conciseness is one of them. So academic writing requires clear meaning, accurate expressions, coherent text, concise language, formal style, of course, and varied sentences and structures, as well as correct grammar and mechanics. And writing with correct grammar itself is not enough. We need to look at other features, and writing concisely is one of the main features of academic writing. So what does writing concisely mean? So conciseness simply means using as few words as possible to express ideas clearly and correctly. Okay, we don't want to cut so many words, use so few words that the meaning becomes unclear, right? So we need to maintain conciseness as well as clarity and correctness. Conciseness has some friends like a brief, economical, direct. Okay. It also has some enemies, and more enemies than friends. Repetitive, wordy, redundant, unnecessary, inconcise. So that's why writing concisely is not easy to achieve. We have so many enemies to fight with. Okay, the targeted students for writing conciseness, for conciseness are advanced ESL students, not at the lower levels, because at the lower levels the main concern would be grammar, spelling, mechanics, right? So this is targeted at advanced ESL students. Okay, next, the common problems affecting conciseness. Here is just my quick summary and proposed solutions. So one is literal repetition. It simply means repeating the same words, same language. And one way to correct literal repetition simply is to delete the repeated words, or sometimes we can combine them, or we can use a plural form like a pronoun or plural verb, and I will explain that in a minute. Semantic repetition simply means repeating the same meaning using different words, and often one way to fix that is to delete the repeated part. Okay? Using omnibus words, could be omnibus nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs. Omnibus words are words that have many meanings, have several meanings. Omni means many, right? And because they have many meanings, they may have no precise meaning. Okay? And that's a problem for writing. So oftentimes we may need to delete or rephrase those words. Overuse of phrases. Students love phrases. They are taught to use phrases, but sometimes they use phrases too many. And therefore we needed to ask them to use single words that's more concise. Okay? Circumlocution, it simply means moving around, right? talk in a roundabout way. Okay, and this is common for many ESL students. We needed to ask them to use direct expressions rather than use roundabout way. Okay. Overuse of noun forms of verbs. That's the nominalized verbs. Okay. If you use nominalized verbs, you have to use at least another verb, right? So it's more wordy. And I'll explain that in a minute, illustrate to you what it means. Unnecessary or too much, too obvious information. Inexperienced ESL writers like to use this. They are not aware that they're writing for professors. You don't have to say everything, not the very obvious. Overuse of passive voice is a very common problem for ESL writing. Some students like to use passive voice. Whenever you use passive voice, you use 3 words at least, right? So in active voice, you use 1 word, but passive voice, you need to use 3 words. So it's more wordy. And choppy sentences. Choppy simply means like many short sentences jumbled together, like chopped vegetables, right? Short sentences. That's not a very good style. Again, it's typical of lower level students, but we're talking about advanced level students, so they should be able to write more condensed sentences. Unnecessary finite clauses. Finite clauses are clauses that reflect the verbs, that show tense and subject-verb agreement. Some people call it full clauses. And we can use non-finite clauses or reduced clauses instead of these full clauses sometimes to make it more concise. Okay? These are kind of abstract, I know. So let's look at some examples to see what exactly they mean. Okay, the first problem, as I mentioned, is literal repetition, repeating the same words. Now, here's an example. The translations do not meet the needs of our colleges and universities. The translations are too general and not specific enough. Translations are repeated, right? So that's literal repetition, okay? These sentences, by the way, they are taken from the students' essays, and I did some editing in order to target the problem of conciseness. So that the literal repetition here, so we needed to try to avoid the repetition. So instead of saying twice, we said 1 time. The translations do not meet the needs of our colleges and the students. And here, they are too general and not specific enough. The same idea, right? So it's semantic repetition, repeating the same meaning. Okay? So it has 2 problems. Okay, simple to say, as they are too general enough, and combine the 2 sentences into 1 complex sentence. Here's another example, having the problem of literal repetition. Furthermore, people will not visit their kin or friends on the 3rd day of the Chinese New Year. They're talking about the Chinese New Year, by the way, because most of the older people believe that if they go to visit their kin or friends, they will quarrel with them. So you can see here, they're repeating the same words, right? Visit their kin or friends. We can make some change to avoid the repetition. We simply use 1 word. If they do, they will quarrel with them, okay? Do is a proof verb. Sometimes we may use a do so, do it, or do that. So here, do is sufficient, okay? Instead of using the whole verbal phrase, 1 word, proof verb, enough. Sometimes we may use a pronoun. Repeating the meaning using different words, semantic repetition. Now here's an example. Since there is a sign language, we are able to understand what the deaf and the mute people want to say. If the sign language does not exist, the deaf and the mute people cannot interact with normal people. It's the same idea said twice, using different language, different words. It's not necessary for academic writing. Thank you. So how to fix it? Simply delete the second part. It's repetition. Okay. It's not necessary. Another example, semantic repetition. One reason that caused the ethnic groups to have different languages and cultures was because of the geography. You can see in this example, reason, cause, because, same idea, right? Different words, same idea. So we can use different, rephrase it, and simply say one factor for the ethnic groups to have different languages and cultures was the geography. Enough. Okay. Omnibus words. Omnibus words are the words that have several meanings. For example, lastly, appearance is the biggest matter of primary concern for students. Matter and concern, same thing, right? And actually, you can take it off. Okay, appearance is a primary concern for students. Enough. Okay, the word biggest matter doesn't add any meaning to the sentence. Okay, it's too vague. Words like thing, something, stuff, matter. So students tend to overuse these words. Often they don't add any meaning to the sentence, and they don't perform any grammatical function either. Another example, he's falling asleep at the dinner table is a good indication of how tired he is. Let's just compare a good indication. Any indication? Same. So if you add the word good, it doesn't add any meaning to the sentence. Okay? If you take it out, the meaning remains the same. It's an indication of how tired he is. And of course, we can use a verb, which is even more concise, right? Indicates how tired he is. Or we can use one word or phrase instead of the clause. He's fatigued instead of how tired he is. That's even better. Okay. I will return to these two comments later. Overuse of phrases. As I said earlier, students love phrases, right? They're taught to use phrases. Because of the fact that almost everyone needs new clothes for the holiday, the streets are crowded and filled by the sellers and the buyers. And so one word is enough. Okay, instead of because of the fact that, because or since, enough, right? So why use those words? I mean, a whole phrase. It's not necessary, right? This is much more concise. Another example, finally I could not put up with the noise upstairs anymore, so I called up the security. Tolerate, right? One word instead of the phrase. In speech, in informal writing, students they can use a lot of phrases, so-called multi-word phrases, phrasal verbs, verbal phrases. That's fine. But in academic writing, you need to use more effective style. Try to use single words like tolerate or call instead of phrases. Okay, and different situations require different styles. That also means that students need to have a large vocabulary. Okay? So vocabulary is very important for advanced academic writing. Circumlocution, as I said earlier, it means speaking or writing in a roundabout way instead of directly. For example, I have come to realize that university education and assistance from professors are the right keys to unlock the doors filled with questions on my mind. So the student was trying to use a metaphor, right? But by attempting to use a metaphor, it's very confusing. So it's better to use a direct language. Okay, simply say, I have come to realize university education is the key to my questions. Simple, direct, clear, right? There's also partial repetition here. Assistance from professors is already included in university education, right? So we should avoid that partial repetition. You don't have to say the same thing twice, even partially. Okay, another example. Thinking for some solution to the problem in context would bring into mind making a proper multi-level parking lot. Now, what does it mean? Right? It simply means one solution to the problem would be a parking lot. Enough. Okay? So, I mean, you don't have to use those so many words in a roundabout way, But many students don't realize that unless the teachers tell them, use direct language is much better. Okay, overuse of noun forms, that's nominalization of verbs. As I said earlier, this is an example, right? Is a good indication of how tired he is. So why not use indicates? Okay? Indicates one word. Okay? If you use a nominalized verb, you have to use another verb, right? So just indicates enough. Okay? Verbs usually stronger and of course more concise than nominalized nouns. Thank you. This is another example to illustrate use of nominalized nouns, and this is it's kind of long, so I want to skip this one. You will have handouts later. So you create instead of a long phrase. Unnecessary, too obvious information. This is a very good example. In the International Mathematics Olympiad and International Physics Olympiad, people can often hear Chinese students won the prizes. It's not necessary to say people can hear that. Simply say, Chinese students often won the prizes. You don't have to say people can hear that. It's too obvious information. So once again, inexperienced students, they like to say everything. It's not necessary. Academic papers are for the academic community, that is professors and classmates. You do not have to say everything. So that's again different from speech, right? In speech, we often sometimes repeat and try to say a lot to make ourselves more clear. But writing is different. The readers, they can go back to read the sentence again if necessary. Okay, overuse of the passive voice, very common problem. Now look at this example. Before a traditional Chinese wedding took place, there were many things which had to be prepared by the bride's and groom's families. Okay, this sentence has several problems. One, it took place, as I said earlier, it's an omnibus verb phrase. Okay, so we can take that off. Okay, so before a traditional Chinese wedding, enough. Okay, the bride's and the groom's families had to prepare many things. So instead of there were many which, okay, there be structure with a clause. This is very common in ESL writing. Which had to be prepared by the brides. Some native speakers also make this error. Yeah. In the sciences and the technology fields, they are taught to use passive voice a lot. But passive voice, if you use passive voice, you have to use 3 words, right? In this case, and while the active voice, just 1 word, so it's more concise than the passive voice. Generally speaking, in social science and humanities, there's a trend of using the active voice instead of passive. So if you have a choice, use the active. Sometimes we don't have a choice, we have to use the passive, but that's a different issue. Choppy sentences simply means, short sentences jumbled together. However, the Canadian society does not consider this problem important. Even when reports are filed, the police do not treat them seriously. The police feel it difficult to communicate with victims. The police have to work with a translator. It's repeating the same words with short sentences. So it's better to put them together, use coordination and or subordination. Say the police do not treat them seriously as they feel it difficult to communicate with victims through a translator. Okay, they're talking about discrimination at the workplace. That's the problem there. Unnecessary finite clauses, it's better to look at examples. Yueqing, which is a small town, there's a finite clause, belongs to Wenzhou City. There are over 70% of its people who are living and doing business out of town. Therefore, most Chinese consider that they are good at business. So these clauses are called finite clauses. They have full clauses, and they have a verb that reflects tense and a subject-verb agreement, right? And you can see this segment has 1, 2, 3, or 4 finite clauses. Okay, it's not necessary to use, to express every idea in a full clause. Sometimes a phrase will be sufficient, right? Yueqing, a small town, enough. Okay, why say a clause? Over 70% of its people live and do business out of town. So this is enough. Okay, rather than there are over 70% of its people who are living. Okay, by the way, many ESL students tend to use the progressive, okay, instead of the simple present. Okay, if it's not something temporary, if it's something that's lasting a situation, then we should use the simple present rather than continuous. And they are B structure and who or which clause, right? So that's wording. Okay. Their B structure tends to be a weak structure, their B structure. So we need to try to avoid, advise students don't overuse their B structure. Okay. Sometimes we have to, but there are times that we can avoid it. Okay. Now here is a guiding strategy to help students achieve conciseness. If you can use a word, don't use a phrase. If you can use a phrase, don't use a clause. If you can use a non-finite or reduced clause, some grammar call it reduced clause, do not use a finite one. If you can use a clause, sometimes it's a complicated clause, don't use a sentence. If you can use one sentence, of course, do not use more than one sentence. It's easier said than done.
Yes.
It's a guiding strategy, so if students are conscious of it, they can try to achieve it. Okay? But we need to raise their awareness. The problem and the solutions, these are exemplar rather than exhaustive. There are probably other problems. It's just a summary of some of the problems. And how concise the writing should be, it depends on the context. No context, no text. So the context determines how concise it should be. Whether you can use a verbal phrase, whether you should use a single word. So it depends on the context. Thank you.